to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
And so what you have is a situation, and there are others who have studied this and kind of quantified this more so than me, is what you have is kind of the bulk of our electorate, or a significant portion of our electorate is the kind of the moderates. We're just exhausted. Mm-hmm. We're exhausted from the noise. We're exhausted from the news cycle, whether it's Twitter or 24/7 cable news. We're just exhausted. And so we're not going to be convinced necessarily by watching anybody's rhetoric. Mm-hmm. We just disengage. And so the people that continue to be engaged are the people who are most appeased and interested by the noise, right?
Yes.
And so that contributes long term, especially to this polarization. So because a vacuum will be filled. And so you have otherwise good, credible, moderate people, even left and right, people who disagree passionately even on certain issues. We're not talking about like squishy people who don't care. Mm-hmm. We're talking about people who would otherwise be engaged were it not for this insane communication patterns that we have. And so we're more likely to, disengage. We've got families to raise. We got, gymnastics to go to, or baseball to go to, whatever, family things to do. We're going to continue doing those and doing our jobs, but we're going to disengage from what's supposed to be a self-governing thing, a participatory governance. Yeah. And so long term, you have people just turn the volume down. We might post stuff to Facebook. We might make snarky remarks, that kind of stuff. But by and large, we're kind of tired of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's not helpful.
No, it's not. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's not going to end well, right? I mean, that's not going to put us that does not put us on a path to success here, right. A path to healing. I mean, that's a scary thing when you're reasonable, moderate, wise, everyday people of America are disengaging, and then you have the fanatics on the right and the left that love it, that love that all of that fodder and noise and extremism and anger and yelling and all of this. I mean, I think it's happening right now with some of the race-related stuff. I think you have people that didn't know what to do, and so they're going to voice some of their thoughts, and then whatever those thoughts are, you realize you step in a little bit, and so now you're just sort of retracting, and well, okay, then I'll stay quiet on this matter. Right. The issue with that is, and look, I understand, like, we're not going to fix the world through social media. I mean, that goes without saying. However, there are a couple of people that I follow on social media, and I know them personally, but I'm not with them every day. I don't get the amount of time with them where I could get without social media, I wouldn't know their viewpoints on a whole lot of things.
Right, sure.
And knowing their viewpoints on a whole lot of things is very helpful to me. It's instructive to me. I don't retweet it all. I don't parrot it. I don't try to copycat it, but it's helpful because I know who they are. I respect them. I know their ideology, their theology, those types of things. And I appreciate when they voice some of their thoughts on current events, social justice type issues, for example, because that's what we're talking about. That helps form me as a young man. That helps me form. Well, if they stop doing that altogether, well, I, for one, and maybe some others, would experience a bit of a void there. Yeah. And then that void is going to be filled with just extremists. So this is not good that people are getting just kind of stepping back.
Right.
What's the path forward here?
It's a great question. I think for Christians in particular, there is space for us to, I think we need to, before we get into the Bible and politics, we need to step a few steps back. What do I mean by that? Drawing a straight line from the Bible to public policy it's very rare for you to be able to do that. There are some bright line issues, murder, for example, but application of that is complex. I've been engaged in it in varying capacities for almost 2 decades now. It's complex. Lots of stuff that Christians in particular, people of goodwill, could disagree on the particulars, while we ought to be agreeing on biblical principles that are pretty clear. Stepping back from politics, the one another passages of Scripture, obligations from one Christian to another, we don't get a opt out. There's no opt out verse from those for the sake of politics, right? So there's a whole battery of kind of ethical responsibilities we have one to another within the church about how to treat one another that we ought to carry with us when we engage politics, especially when we're debating those in the church. And so for some reason, I have a few theories, but for a lot of reasons, we don't do that. We engage politics in a very different way than we engage just about any other debate within the church, or political issues. Or if an issue becomes political, then we change how we discuss them. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, yeah.
But for example, particularly when fellow church members are pasting and debating on Facebook, I'm one to discuss policy and politics, and I'm okay with that. But I also want to make sure I'm communicating that in a Christian manner, or communicating Christianly. It doesn't mean shying away from convictions, but it does require us to treat the other person with dignity, which means we don't get to somehow make some kind of snide remark that basically says you don't get to talk about this anymore, right? Or your viewpoint is invalidated, that I don't want to hear it. And we have all sorts of linguistic tricks that we do that, but sometimes the point is, for example, you might post an article, say, about the race thing, and someone says, well, if my church ever did that, I'd stop contributing. Well, what is that? It's not an engagement. It's not a fruitful engagement of the subject matter. It's designed to intimidate. It might come off as a gruff old man or whatever, but it's designed to intimidate and shut down conversation. When church members are doing that to one another, that's a problem. Yeah. So a lot of our political discourse problems for a Christian perspective, I think is rooted in kind of a lack, we forget, we kind of silo off politics from the rest of our Christian obligations.
Yes, we do. We do. There's something about it that I think it's the part of it, maybe the emotionality of it, the polarization of it. You had retweeted something from Paul D. Miller, who I don't know who that is, but his Twitter handle's at Paul D. Miller 2.
He's fantastic. Follow him.
Yeah, I will. Podcasts are the return of the conversation salon. At worst, they can be meandering, occasionally boring and insular, but at best, they are the last holdout of decent, insightful public dialogue. Turn off the TV, turn on the podcast, and save democracy.
That's right.
I was like, oh, that's so great, man.
Yeah. That's exactly what you're doing to him. You should have him on your podcast. Oh, he has a podcast that he hosts called Awkward Conversations.
Oh, yeah?
Which is pretty brilliant. He's a foreign policy expert. He currently teaches at Georgetown.
Okay.
Brilliant guy, brilliant Christian. He's contributed to some work from the ERLC.
Okay.
So he's a wonderful brother. And super talented in his space.
I love to look into him more, but I thought that was really good. And would you use social media? Mm-hmm. What do you use primarily?
It's primarily Twitter and Facebook. Instagram has become mostly my Cato pictures.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it works better. It's better. It's easier to communicate ideas on policy, et cetera, on Twitter than Instagram for sure, it's built that way.
Sure.
But, do you view it as, here's a great place to have a conversation. Here's a great place to share some thoughts. But you won't get into like a back and forth argument on Twitter, or do you? Mm-hmm. Or do you view it as, look, these are great places. These are great on-ramps into an article or to a podcast or something like that, and you would take care not to post anything that is too contentious on social media?
Yeah, I definitely try not to inflame people on social media. Part of that is from experience. I have the background of having. I used to when they had comment sections on the ERLC website. I was for a period of time in charge of moderating that.
Oh boy!
And figuring out how we were going to do that. That's a rabbit trail that doesn't really deserve going down all that much, except for you learn some. You learn some tips and tricks about online communication. Number one, I had formulated like 5 rules basically that we posted in the comments section about like, this is what, this is our website and this is how we're going to moderate. You can love it or leave it basically. Mm-hmm. It was done in a winsome manner. But number one, when people are online anonymously, that's not a good faith actor. And so what I try to tell people who I like a lot on Twitter who get all out of sorts and offended when an anonymous Twitter account says something nasty about them with under 100 followers, I'm like, and they retweet it and like condemn it. I'm like, guys,
who cares?
Who cares?
Yeah.
You're punching down like several weight classes. You have 20,000 followers. You have 40,000 followers because you're a published author. You're fantastic. We love you. Who cares about what this twit on an anonymous account says about you? Mm-hmm. Just ignore it. Do not look at the mentions.
Yeah.
Just don't do it, especially at a certain level. I'm not at that level.
Yeah.
And then, so you require identity. And of course, Twitter and Facebook, you have the identity portion. But what my former boss, Russell Moore, used to say was that social media has done what video games did to a lot of us. And it's basically turned our public discourse into a video game experience. So you get the experience of having done something. You think you've done something civically minded by tweeting or hashtagging something or whatever. The truth is, you probably didn't contribute much at all to meaningful public discourse. You certainly didn't forward the ball as far as getting policy actually accomplished. But you might have ticked off a lot of people. And in the Christian space, you might have served to provide a poor witness. And so for the social media thing, what I've learned, and I'm certainly not 100% perfect on this, but what I try to remember, and this goes true for talking heads, TV news stuff too, we can get really sucked into winning the debate with the person we're debating, and we kind of want to club them to death to win our argument. What we often forget are the most important audience for any kind of debate is the audience, people who are watching you, people who might not even be liking, or, subtly liking, picking sides based on the likes of a debate on Twitter. People are watching your discourse. They're watching it, whatever your position is, whoever you are, but particularly if you're a Christian engaging the public space about Christian things or trying to bring a Christian, you've got to opt in and being like, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm going to discuss public things. Yeah. People are watching that. And that, particularly over time, really, people are paying attention to that more than you think. And so you can see, and I've seen it done by Christians on Twitter. I've seen it done with Christians on 24-channel prominent national news media, where they get so sucked into like arguing their point and berating the guest, they're opposite them. Or even feeling attacked by the guest, maybe rightly, that they lose the audience. And so, for example, like a conservative theologian debating a liberal theologian. If a conservative theologian lets the liberal guy get under their skin and gets all antsy and hot, well, people gravitate towards the liberal guy, even though on paper, if you wrote down their statements, yes, people would side with the theological conservative. Yes. But nobody wants to go have a coffee with that guy. Yeah. Same thing on Twitter. Same thing on Facebook, I think. And so I think when you're engaging and even debating, which I haven't done a lot of recently, I did have one back and forth again with a brother of Christ. We debated a very nuanced issue
on Twitter.
On Twitter.
Okay.
I try to stay away from that now. First of all, to really do it well takes a lot of time.
Oh, yeah. You mean to debate?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
It takes a lot of time. And sometimes it's worth doing, sometimes it's not. But the way in which we do that, it ought to be charitable, and we ought to try not to talk down to one another.
Yeah.
Years ago, this was a Facebook thing, which I've definitely not done in years. I felt I was engaging a brother. I think it was on an immigration issue, or as a Muslim immigration issue, something to do with that realm of things. I had a brother post who ought to know brother, who's a theological conservative Christian, I believe him to be, and he completely misappropriated a passage of scripture. And I called him out on it, and it took some days, mind you, to work him off of that commitment to where he recognized his error. And you're like, yeah, you're right. He still didn't agree with me on the content of the issue.
Sure.
But the point was he recognized that scripture he deployed it completely out of place.
Gotcha.
But what I had to do, I had another brother of Christ in my other church who I could see from kind of preliminary responses on that thread just wanted to pound the living daylights out of this guy with the social justice rhetoric. So I had to back channel this guy and say, look, I think this guy's movable based on what I know about his commitments to scripture that he and I both share. So I had to kind of fend off my progressive brother for the sake of trying to move my conservative brother.
Yeah.
Based on principles that we all share.
Right.
But in the social media space, people were about to, throw fists.
Yes.
So, and but to do that took days of Facebook thread posts.
Right.
It's exhausting.
Yes. Yeah, it really is.
Don't do it.